Australia. It's a huge country in the southern hemisphere. A place with hot sunshine, beautiful beaches, and a lot of adventures to be had. My adventure was driven by the desire I have for flying, specifically vintage biplanes. But I had no idea at this point that in addition to that, I was going to end up having some epic times exploring over half of the country, including some of the outback. I grew up around this Tiger Moth. It was on a farm strip close to where I lived. I had longed to spend a summer season working at one of these places that gives rides to people in them. This was me in England checking out on the French stump, but the job there didn't work out. So at 27 years old, I was still young enough to apply for the working holiday visa for Australia, the same as a backpacker would get. I found several outfits that had Tiger Moths, and I made a few phone calls. I got on a plane, and I hopped over to the other side of the world. I got a one-way ticket to Sydney. I had no hassles at immigration. To them, I was simply there on a backpacker's working holiday, which they get coming in all the time. Entry under this program was a very quick process back then, and I have no doubt that it will be like this once again in the near future. I chose Sydney as my starting point, mainly because of the King's Cross car market. The place where backpackers arrive and depart from, so their vehicles all get passed along at this place. There wasn't a lot of choice though. I'm kidding, that's in the outback somewhere. But I didn't find what I wanted here. That night I checked into a backpacker's hostel, a bit like this one. Some travellers live in these places and have a great time meeting new people. For me, it was okay for a night. Next day, I went to Palm Beach. This is known on TV as Summer Bay, the location where they film Home and Away. I grew up watching that show, and so I wanted to go and visit this beach. Then I decided I should head south towards Melbourne. One of the outfits I had contacted that had the Tiger Moths I wanted to fly were in Melbourne. I also knew someone in England who was originally from Australia. Her parents had a small farm which was on the way to Melbourne, and they were willing to let me stay with them for a few days. So I picked up a rental car to get down there in, and then I bought this Holden from the used car place that was there. I set up a bank account, got a local SIM card and things like that. It was a very pleasant, relaxing week. I was very well looked after. So then I went the rest of the way down to Melbourne. I went straight to the airfield where the Tiger Moths were. They were beautiful, and they were going to hire me for the season. I was set. This was what I'd been longing for. First thing I needed to do was find a place to live. It's okay staying in a backpacker's for a night or two, especially if you're travelling, but I was looking for somewhere with my own room, where I could be comfortable for a little while. So that night I logged onto Gumtree to look for rooms to rent. There were lots of student accommodations which could be rented month to month. I figured I would just go and see one, and if it's livable, commit to the 1 month. Then I'm living in the local area, and I can spend that month going to see nicer places where I could call home for the whole season. Not very far away from there is Pin Oak Court. On TV, this street is known as Ramsay Street in the Aussie soap called Neighbours. This was the other one I grew up watching. So I took a drive over there. This is me standing in front of number 22. They just put the extra number on when they're filming. I found out that you could meet the Neighbours cast every week at the Elephant and Wheelbarrow. I went there twice during this month. Here is me standing with Alan Fletcher, that plays Karl Kennedy, Blair McDonough, that plays Stewie Parker, Margot Robbie, that played Donna Freedman, Then on another night I met Kym Valentine that played Libby Kennedy. And then me and Alan again. Meanwhile, back at the airfield, I was getting familiar with operating Tiger Moths. Topping up the oil, strapping in the passengers, and swinging the prop. Learning the ropes of the company is how you might describe it. I didn't have to hold an Australian license to fly there. My American commercial pilot's license was recognised. I just needed a temporary 3-month foreign validation certificate to use it in Australia. I had 2 or 3 training flights just before Christmas, and then I was good to go in the new year. I also found the place I was going to move into, the place I got to call home for the season. This very nice house and the one next door was owned by a lady that had a really great community living arrangement going on. Rooms were rented out to professionals that needed short-term accommodation in the area. Here was where I was going to strike up friendships with some great people from different parts of the world. The icing on the cake was that it was a 5-minute drive from the beach. So it was all arranged. I was going to move into this house after Christmas and start my dream job for the summer. Christmas is in summertime in Australia, by the way. It's a Southern Hemisphere thing. My friend in England was coming over to her parents' place. I was invited back up there to the farmhouse to join them. It was a lovely time. After Christmas lunch, we went to look at the kangaroos on the golf course.
I love the kangaroos.
Then the next day, I took Charlene and Martin with me and dropped them off in Melbourne.
This is the Hume Highway, the M1. So it goes all the way from up that way to this
Sydney
way.
to Melbourne.
And we're going, Sydney to Melbourne. So we're heading back down to Melbourne from Lyle and Mary's house after Christmas. We've had a great Christmas. Now we've got a bit of a road trip. Charlie's got the sweets.
I dropped them off in Melbourne later that afternoon, and then I went on to that house that I was going to move into for the season. The residents of the house and their friends from nearby all got together to bring in the new year. There was much dancing and merriment. The day after that was the first day on the job. Nothing else sounds quite like that gypsy engine in a Tiger Moth. The British DH-82 de Havilland Tiger Moth was designed in the 1930s. They were used by the Royal Air Force in the Second World War as a primary trainer. As they were built in large numbers, you can still find many of them in different parts of the world. You can find them in private hangars, in museums, at air displays, or being used to give joyrides to many happy customers like I'm doing here. Flying a Tiger Moth from a grass field on a summer evening is a nostalgic experience quite like no other. This particular one was built in 1937 and still retains its military markings. Back at the house, they all celebrated my 28th birthday with me. VIC knighted everyone with French bread before I blew out the candles on my cake. I was in my element, flying these over the Melbourne beaches and being waved at by the people sunbathing. When I got home from a day's flying, I'd have some orange juice, or some chocolate milk. Then I'd usually go with one of the housemates down to the beach, and often jump off the pier. I found the Tiger Moth to be the most enjoyable aircraft to fly aerobatics with. I was never into the intense high G maneuvers. This is more my style. Gentle loops and barrel rolls and things like that are the types of aerobatics that I get the most enjoyment out of. It's fairly easy on the passengers too. I didn't have one that didn't enjoy their ride with me. A few of us from the house took a drive down the Great Ocean Road, starting in a beautiful little place called Port Fairy. Then coming back towards Melbourne by the famous 12 Apostles. The Tachin. There were a couple of Iranian people living at the house. She made this delicious dish that I liked so much that years later, after I moved to Canada and got married, I told my wife about Tachin, and she found the recipe and she makes it for me sometimes. So here's a little trivia for you. There was a 1956 movie called Moby Dick about a big white whale. In 1998, there was a TV series of it. They filmed it in that lake that you can see off to the left. Just a little bit further south, there was a flight school that also had this Tiger Moth. I had become known to them, but I didn't get round to flying this one. I got busy enough with those other two. However, they did have me do a little instructing for them in their little jabberoos. That wasn't really anything too exciting for me, but what that led to was something that ended up becoming an epic adventure. They said, "Hey Chris, we've got a guy that owns a Cessna 172 in Darwin. He's moving down here, but he's not a licensed pilot. He has about 20 hours. Would you go up to Darwin, which is right at the top of the country, and fly his plane down here with him and his wife in it? He will cover all expenses." I said, "You mean he's gonna buy me a ticket up there to fly that Cessna down here from the northern tip to the southeast corner and see all that outback and everything?" Yep. That's about 2,000 miles if you can route direct. There was an extremely hot and humid climate in Darwin. We didn't get going on the first day because of the low cloud and rain, so I went for a stroll around town and checked out the local wildlife. Then I met up again with Ray and Kate back at the hotel. We relaxed by the pool and went for a swim. We planned to depart the following morning. Cunnamulla, Northern Territories just outside Darwin, is where we departed from. It's a singular dirt strip. I put Ray in the left seat and let him fly most of the time. As I was a qualified instructor, I was quite comfortable flying from the right seat if I needed to. Cunnamulla to Daly Waters was the first leg, 330 miles. The terrain up here was so different. Dirt roads, hundreds of miles of forests. Civilization was very widespread. Daly Waters Airfield has some interesting pre-war history. Today this place is known for its pub. It's a very interesting place. That's it down there. Somehow we knew that was where the guy was going to be at that we needed over at the airfield to bring fuel to us. Now this Cessna was an old cattle herding plane. It had a loud horn attached underneath. We flew over that pub and sounded the horn. When we landed, here he was with the fuel. We then went over to that famous pub to get some lunch. Next leg, Daly Waters to Tennent Creek. That's about 250 miles. The terrain around here just looks like swampland. That's a huge runway over there, but there's no civilization around for miles. I think it's used to bring a large number of people to the area, for whatever reason they need to do that for. Traditional fueling this time, with a credit card swipe on the pump. Then I had to make the decision that we'll have to stay here for the night. The rain caught up with us and the cloud base was too low. I didn't want to take this plane into cloud at night over such remotely populated terrain. There wasn't enough airports with instrument and night facilities on our route that we could divert to if we needed to. The terminal was mostly empty, except for us, and this guy on the wall guarding the reserves. We walked past these colourful vans as we went out of the airport. I don't know if this was a vehicular art competition or what, but I think I'd give the prize to the orange and white one at the front. Then we found a place to spend the night, and we got warm and dry with a hot cup of tea. Next morning, I met Ray and Kate on the veranda. We set up his laptop and checked the weather en route. We were going to go to Alice Springs next, but there was another large weather system moving through down there. So to go around it, we needed to route more towards the east before turning south. So the next stop was going to be Mount Isa in Queensland. From Tennent Creek, that's 400 miles. So we walked back onto the airport. As we got closer to the plane, we could hear the strangest noise coming from it. This croaking sound seemed to echo through the whole fuselage. There was a frog that had gotten into it. It was just sitting there in the window, as if to say, "I'm coming too, get me out of here." We didn't take it. We had fairly decent weather for this leg. The terrain was becoming a lot less like swamp now. There was lots of grass and trees. It's funny, between the places that we were landing at, you might see no civilization for as much as 200 miles. There's the odd cattle station here and there, but then you come up on a city with a population of something like 18,000, then it's back to nothing and no one for the next 200 miles. Mount Isa is the administrative, commercial and industrial centre for the state's vast northwestern region. The Mount Isa mines are the second largest copper producer in Australia. Good old BP fuel for the plane, and then we had an Outback pie for lunch. The next place we were going to from Mount Isa was to Winton, Queensland. That's about 280 miles. The air down here is much drier, and the terrain was rocky. It's fascinating when you imagine the process involved in the terrain being shaped like this. The further east we got, the flatter the land became. I see Pringles. And here's Kate. She's in charge of the snacks. She occasionally passes a sandwich and a bottle of water to us from back there. Here is the grass becoming much more green and lush. Here is a shed in the middle of nowhere. Nothing and no one else around for miles, just the shed. There's another cattle station. Here is Winton. It's a perfectly square town. I like this place. It was neat and tidy and very clean looking. The folks here were very friendly too. We wanted to get the plane inside a hangar for the night because of the forecasted winds. If we moved this small plane to the side, we could get the Cessna in there with it. So we did that, and then we called the number that was on the side of the hangar to ask if that was okay. The guy said, "Sure thing." When we told him that we moved the small plane to one side, his answer was, "What plane?" This was the place in town to go out and eat. Something on this bar made us think of ordering up some spring chicken. Kate put in the order, and we had a very satisfying supper. After that, I wanted to go for a walk around outside. The sky was turning that orange colour that happens when there is a storm coming. This is the Winton Club, the very building that Qantas Airlines was founded in 1920. Here's an old Mack Thermodyne. I like these old trucks. Those are all cockatoos up there. I figured I'd best get back before the rain came. The next morning, it was too windy. We went to the airfield and this huge goanna started to walk towards us. I told it to go away, and so off it went, and no getting in the plane like the frog did. This foot is because Winton has a dinosaur museum. There were lots of dinosaur remains found around this area. So we found a taxi, then got a ride with someone else back into town. We explored the place a little further. I do like to see these old cars that escaped the crusher. Then we found someone who puts a whole new meaning to the term wall art. So then we went back to Tattersalls for another delicious pub meal, before checking back into the motel for another night. I put the TV on in the room while I had a cup of tea, to see that the weather in Alice Springs, where we were supposed to go, had caused some chaos down there.
Reasons the road has been closed, and it's a very common story right up the coast. And with limited access between one part of town and the other, it's taking as much as 40 minutes to travel just 2 kilometres.
Next morning, Winton to Longreach. This was just 110 miles, but we wanted to top off the tanks there as the next leg was much longer. Look at all that flat, lush green space as far as you can see. Longreach is the home of the Qantas Museum. Some of their historic fleet resides there. Next leg, Longreach to Charlieville. That's about 300 miles. On this leg, we ran into a bit of trouble. The artificial horizon on this plane is vacuum driven from a venturi tube on the outside of the fuselage, rather than having an engine-driven vacuum system like the more modern aircraft have. At some point earlier in the trip, this instrument had toppled. Whether that was a bug that got inside the venturi tube, or rainwater that got in and froze, I'm not sure. So with that being potentially unreliable, we were not going to plan to fly in cloud. However, what we were faced with on this leg was some low enough cloud that I wanted to climb above the layer. That I was okay with. The instrument was functioning normal just now, and we knew that we were heading towards clearer skies ahead. So I started climbing. We kept on climbing through 6,000 feet. I kept seeing blue sky just above, but we weren't quite breaking out on top. I figured that I must have been climbing just inside an upsloping cloud top, and I kept getting teased on the way up. We finally broke out on top at 7,500 feet. Now you ask any pilot, how high can you fly in an unpressurized airplane before you reach the level with no oxygen? Standard answer, 10,000 feet. That's what most of us have in the back of our minds. We are okay until we get to 10,000 feet, and then you need to be in a pressurized plane or carrying supplemental oxygen. The reality is, you've got to think in terms of density altitude. In a climate like this, you are going to reach that point when you are quite a bit lower in terms of altitude above sea level. The first dangerous part about becoming hypoxic is that it puts you into a euphoric state. You deny to yourself that you are suffering from hypoxia. You think it'll be alright. Yet I noticed that I'd wandered 30 degrees off track, and then I overcorrected and went 30 degrees off the other way. I knew what was happening, but that euphoric state stopped you reacting appropriately. The thing that made me straight away pull the power and come back down through the cloud was tingling fingertips. This is the only time I had ever experienced hypoxia, but I knew I had read in a textbook in the past that tingling fingertips was one of the symptoms. That was my wake-up trigger. I put us into a fairly rapid descent. My senses all returned to normal within a couple of minutes, and we did break out the bottom of the cloud at 2,500 feet. It was a much higher cloud base here than it was when we made the decision to climb up through it. Ray and Kate didn't experience any of the same symptoms that I got, but they did say that they noticed themselves getting sleepy. We continued on to Charlieville at 2,500 feet. As we got closer, we noticed just how much rain there had been here. The area was quite flooded. We called up Charlieville on the Unicom frequency. We didn't get any response. As we arrived over the town of Charlieville, we could see that they had been seriously flooded out. Those houses must have all been evacuated. The airport, however, was on higher ground, so we landed non-radio, and we did get some fuel from the Shell this time. The guys sitting outside the clubhouse were telling us that they were getting power for the fuel pump from an alternative source. Their radio went down when the main power had been taken out with all the flooding in the area, and that's why they didn't respond. They didn't even hear us. Now I can't remember where we had planned to stop for the night, but we didn't get there. I diverted us into Cunnamulla because of adverse weather en route. Cunnamulla was 120 miles from Charlieville. We weren't going into cloud this time. The base was going to be too low to break out at a minimum safe altitude over the airfield. We flew along underneath the base, looked at the windsock to check which runway we would use, did a low-level circuit and landed. We got the plane inside for the night. Then we went off into town to visit the famous Cunnamulla Feller, a bronze statue created because of a song about life in the outback. Then I went to visit a tractor in jail. I noticed quite a few of these old retired Fords and Fs in Australia being used as yard ornaments. We found a place for the night, and while we were having supper in the restaurant, Charlieville was on the news.
Charlieville Main Street is a canal.
Next morning, we checked the weather over a cup of coffee. It was good to go. So we took a little walk by the river, and then left. And if we didn't get delayed, we would make it to our final destination by the evening. Cunnamulla to Bourke, New South Wales, 150 miles. The cloud base was getting higher and higher the further south we got. Down there on the road below us, there was a vehicle. It's always nice to see when you're in the outback, because you can often go for more than 100 miles and not see anyone. After a while, we had clear skies and very pleasant flying conditions. There was no more adverse weather forecasted en route. At this point, we knew that we were going to make it all the way there by tonight. Now this place is in the Urban Dictionary. When people talk about any remote location in the outback, they say, that place is way out the back of Bourke. I guess you could say I've been there, because I went through this building and out the back of it. There's nothing there. Bourke to Griffith, 320 miles. Nothing was going to stop us now. This is where we started to see the end of the outback. We were getting closer to the coast, which is where the majority of people live in Australia. Griffith to Mangalore in Victoria, 200 miles. I spy with my little eye something beginning with S. Mangalore to Tooradin, the final destination. 120 miles routing east to the Melbourne air traffic zone, as they wouldn't let us go straight through. That was an epic adventure. It took 7 days in total. It felt so great to get back to the house though. Home-cooked meals with friends, wine and creature comforts. Those things you appreciate much more when you've been away on such a trip. There were still a few more weeks left of the summer season, where I got to enjoy some nice sunsets on the beach with friends. One night, some of us went to the Moonlight Wildlife Sanctuary. The little wallabies used to come right up and eat out of your hand. Geelong Water Park. I like the lazy river and the water slides. There's no need to grow out of this kind of fun. I had a few more weeks left on the Tiger Moth before the season would draw to a close. I took Arash and Vicky from the house with me for a ride. Eventually the summer season came to its end. My temporary foreign pilot license validation expired. The temperature in Melbourne was getting much cooler, even though Arash is still in his t-shirt. There was just one more adventure to be had. Some of my new friends that were also foreign tourists on working holiday visas were flying up to Cairns to explore the rainforests and experience the Great Barrier Reef. So I figured it was a chance for me to go and do those things too. I would drive up there a couple of days ahead of them, so that we had a car to get around in. Then I would arrive on the same day as they landed. From there, I could just go direct to Sydney, to see if I could sell off this car at the King's Cross car market. Then that could be where I would finish my time in Australia and fly home. So this was the last supper I had with the friends of the house and the visitors that came over that night. There's that guest book again. The next day, it was time to pack up and move on.
Well, I'm just getting ready to go. Just packing. Hi, Mr. Brown.
Hey.
Alright. Well, that's it. It's been fantastic staying here for 3 months. Yeah. We've had some good fun, haven't we, Arash?
Yeah,
Brown.
exactly.
Okay. Well, it's stacked. I can't get it any further than that. If you find anything in the house that I've forgotten, can you drive it to Cairns?
Yes.
Okay.
See ya. Drive safe.
It took 3 days to drive to Cairns. I was back in the Outback again, but further east than I was when I was flying the Cessna down. Most of it looks like this, desolate highway for a couple of 100 miles between the towns. One thing I didn't like about these roads was that you had no cell service and you might not see another vehicle for quite some time. You were pretty much out there by yourself. Once you get to the towns, there's motels, gas, restaurants, and usually a mechanic shop if you need it. Now the huntsman spiders, seen lots around Australia, is often found up in trees. It won't harm you, it's non-venomous. I must have parked underneath a tree where there was one, because when I was back on the road, it started crawling up the outside of the windshield. It took a look at me through the glass, then it turned back round and went down under the hood. I didn't find it when I stopped and opened it up, so I don't know how long it rode along for. I didn't tend to drive after sunset. I was told that the kangaroos come out all over the road in droves at night. When I got off that dirt road, I was closing in on the coast. I had good cell service from here. I was still a couple of hours out. Meanwhile, my friends had arrived and they'd texted that they'd checked in. We stayed in a nice backpackers hostel in Cairns. There was a hot tub and really good meals at breakfast and supper time. Next morning, we took a long cable car ride up into the rainforest. The views from up here were fantastic. At this point, we didn't know where that steam was coming from. Then we could see what it was. That's quite the waterfall, eh? There were certainly some substantial trees up here. The forests go on for miles and miles. Yes, there were some substantial spider webs too. These are orb spiders. They won't hurt you. They were quite the size though. This was about 5 inches long. The biggest we saw was this. This one's as big as your breakfast bowl. The next place the cable car took us to was a small settlement in the rainforest where there was a man. Next day, we were on the Quick Cat, going to see the Great Barrier Reef. You could go on a scuba dive tour, a snorkel tour, or you could go for a ride in a glass-bottom boat if I remember rightly. They gave you a crash course on scuba diving while on the way out to the reef. I had never done it before and really wanted to try it. I thought this would be my chance, but honestly, for a first-timer, this is not the place to learn. They don't have time for you if you're struggling with the equipment or if you aren't comfortable. I resorted to snorkeling and looking down over the reef. That was a great experience in itself. But if you're planning on doing a tour here and you don't know how to scuba dive, I strongly recommend taking some lessons at home first. Then you will really enjoy this experience properly. This isn't my footage, but this is footage of the Great Barrier Reef, and this is the kind of thing you can expect to see if you do go on a tour there. That night, we went to the Lagoon Harbour, a huge swimming pool by the ocean that's lit up for night time. It was very relaxing. The next day, I dropped off my friends at the airport in Cairns. I think they were flying back to their home country if I remember rightly. I started heading towards Sydney, but this time taking the coastal roads. Cairns to the Whitsundays, 300 miles. The Whitsundays are a group of 74 tropical islands just off the Queensland coast. I had picked up a passenger that day from the swimming pool in Cairns the night before. I wasn't planning on spending any time at the Whitsundays myself, but this person was going to. I can really see the appeal. Touring those islands, experiencing the beautiful white sandy beaches. Although Victoria was in its autumn when I left Melbourne, Queensland was still experiencing hot summery weather, which would have been perfect for here. This person I dropped off got themselves onto a sailboat tour. You become part of the crew and you have to work on the boat as you tour the islands, but you might spot some whales and you get to swim with the turtles. So the next day, after breakfast in the Whitsundays backpackers, I started to head to Brisbane, 440 miles. Brisbane is the capital and third most populated city in Australia. They get great weather year-round and it's a really happening place. It's also a clean place with vibrant green spaces from what I saw. I didn't really explore there much as I had a place I could stay. Vicky, the landlady of the house in Melbourne, had a friend here that also had a nice house and a room for the night. It was in a gated community with a pool and a hot tub. I spent quite a bit of time here when I'd arrived the night before, relaxing under the stars. Next day, I drove the last leg to Sydney. That's 560 miles from Brisbane. So I was back in the city where my adventure had started. This car had served me well, but the bands were wearing out on the transmission. the transmission fluid smelt burnt. It started shifting erratically. Then came the grinding sound. Needless to say, this wasn't going on the King's Cross car market. I sold it to this mechanic, which more than paid for my flight ticket back to England. One other thing I wanted to do in Sydney was meet Mr. Jordan. His Volkswagen Beetle was the first one of these that I ever got to drive. Mr. Jordan also owns this very special car, which at the time was being shipped to him from the States. This is the same car in 1980 when it starred in Herbie Goes Bananas. Mr. Jordan was telling me how he was in the States with this car at the 40th anniversary of the first movie. He met Joaquin Gray, the child actor from Herbie Goes Bananas. 10 years later, at the 50th, I also met Joaquin Gray, but that's a whole other story that you'll find in a whole other video of mine. So that was a wrap. As you can see, I had an absolutely amazing time when I went to Australia. I made many friends, I had some epic adventures. I got to work at my dream job of flying Tiger Moths for the summer season. Australia offers so much to the young travelling tourist on a working holiday visa. At the time I'm making this video, Australia is experiencing a lot of political problems. Tourism and the working holiday program may well be halted just now. But it is a temporary situation, and it is being resolved. So in the near future, I have no doubt that you too could have an epic adventure out there of your own, and I hope you have as good a time as I did.